We are here because we are dedicated to helping the entire CrossFit community. Determined to elevate coaches, box owners, athletes, and everything in between, we believe that this mission will begin right here, right now. While this time and this goal begins with you, our hope is that you take this fire ignited within you and weave it into your own life with the same unrelenting passion to give those you have the privilege of coming in contact with the best hour of their day.
Welcome to the podcast, Robb Wolf. What an OG. You were just saying it's been a while. It's probably been almost 15
over 10 years.
Yeah,
over 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day, the nutrition lecture coming through town. Still a lot of that. Most of it's still relevant. Most of what you were saying back then is still relevant. Pretty crazy.
Sleep, nutrition, gut health. I don't think it's going to go out of style anytime soon. Yeah.
Well, at least not the basics and the right stuff, right?
Right.
So, well,
right.
And I should be clear. If I have to take a breath at all during this, I just had the lemon habanero element. So if my mouth is a little on fire right now.
They do recommend a 6 foot social distancing when opening that, at least. So yeah.
That's one of the topics I definitely want to discuss. I appreciate you guys sending those over. My wife and I, every day we've been taking one. Awesome. And I absolutely love it. And I'm someone that prior to that was doing the like pink Himalayan salt type thing. Mm-hmm. This is better potentially just because it tastes like chocolate, but it just, I really just enjoy it. So I want to hear all about the journey into creating that. But before the journey, and maybe it's part of the journey, where did those flavors come from? Because here's what I think. I think they have a great variety for all taste preferences. But I love that chocolate one. The chocolate one is like having chocolate milk in the morning. The lemon habanero, my wife and I kind of like fight. You want this one? You can have this one. And all the juicy ones are great. They're like refreshing. Right. So where did the idea for those different flavors come from?
So that's part of the Fiesta pack. It's chocolate, lemon habanero, and then mango chili.
Yeah.
And one of our co-founders, Luis Villaseñor, is a native of Mexico City. And so we really leaned into that, Mesoamerican, cacao, spicy kind of flavor profile. And we didn't know when we first launched this thing. We suspected that it would go well as an electrolyte company, but we didn't really know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there in the space. And so we formulated things so that if we needed to pivot and just be a drink mix company, we were there, And so when we did the formulation, it's like, does this taste good with a little bit of booze in it also? Or is it like fantastic before or after a workout? And so we so long as we've been able to book in both of those kind of standards, I guess, if those are standards, then that's what we went with. But that was actually Luis's brainchild to go the mango chili, lemon habanero, and then the chocolate to have this Fiesta pack, kind of celebrating the Latin American influence in the business and just in general. Yeah.
Well, and now that you say that, I do think any of those flavors would go with a couple shots of tequila. And
they work really well. Yeah.
You want to hear something funny? Something I still have to give Rob credit for years later is the NorCal margarita. Mm-hmm. It's still my go-to. I don't drink very often, but if we're out, I'll get the tequila, so with some club soda and a pinch of lime. And people, I think when you've been involved in something for a very long time, you forget that other people may not be aware of this or that. And I'm like, oh yeah, this was like the go-to drink for years. Like this was paleo at our gym. Like this was okay and acceptable in paleo challenges.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, even traveling around now, every once in a while, I'll see a bar menu, and it doesn't happen the way that it did, like 2010, 2013, when everything was really on a powerful up cycle. But I still every once in a while will run across a bar, in New York, in Florida, in some random place, and it's like NorCal margarita. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Is that still your go-to drink?
Pretty much. I mean, I just do the element citrus in that. And the funny thing is, I think I maybe burned myself out on the citrus because it was our first flavor. And like, I can't drink it in water. Like, I just have this like aversion. It's kind of like getting super hungover on tequila, and then you just smell it and you're done. But I love it in a drink, and I'll actually goose it with a little bit more lime juice and a couple of shots of tequila, some soda water. Try not to fizz the whole thing over, and it's really good. But it's funny that I have that aversion to just the just the plain stuff in water at this point. But I did really wear the tread off of it in the beginning.
What was the catalyst for you to think we need to do this? I mean, a lot of people will take, like I was saying, Himalayan salt or add a pinch of salt to something. Obviously, there's no flavor to it. So you have that. What else is the benefit there? And then I also want to know, when's the most ideal time to take it? Personally, I wake up, drink a little bit of standard water, and then throw that in a shaker bottle and drink it. What's your recommendation for that?
Oh man, it's funny because you would think that something that has a dosing schedule like that would be the most buttoned up piece to it, but it's honestly the most difficult to pin down because do we have a large individual or a small individual? Do you have somebody who is a super sweater? These are people, usually male, who at any given work output, at any given temperature, they just sweat disproportionately more than most other people. They tend to lose much larger amounts of sodium. Like, we've done some work with some NHL teams that track the body water loss and sodium loss in their athletes. And these are pretty big dudes. They're like 200 pounds plus. Like, they're not wee little waifs, but these guys will lose upwards of 10 pounds of water in the course of a practice or a hard game, and 10 grams of sodium during that time. And the kind of sports medicine, mainstream medicine guidelines are generally at about 2 grams of sodium intake per day. So for these hard charging athletes, they will never get back ahead of that curve. Like, they're going to be chronically sodium depleted, which cramping is kind of the end stage of that. Like, you're really far down the line of being underpowered in electrolytes, specifically sodium. So like, the how much and the perfect timing is really subjective. Like, some people get up and have some electrolytes right upon waking, and this is kind of a long standing thing where people use like the Himalayan sea salt or something, and they'll put it in some water and they'll drink that first thing in the morning. Lots of people do post workout, peri-workout. It's really based off of need. So if you're feeling lethargic, kind of foggy headed, low energy levels, then instead of just assuming that maybe it's a carb issue, instead of immediately assuming that you need more caffeine, maybe look to electrolytes and see if that is the main problem. And I mean, interestingly, going way back in CrossFit history, it was 2004, 2005, I was in Santa Cruz and chatting with Greg Glassman, and we were just talking about like the zone and different things. And he mentioned that if folks didn't aggressively supplement sodium, that they just kind of flamed out. Like, that was this kind of like secret piece to making that approach work. And I heard him say that, but it was just kind of one of these things that went in. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not afraid of sodium. I salt my food. But it was almost 20 years later that I really appreciated, oh, this is actually like how much you need. And this is part of the reason why we flavored these things, because just salting your food, what we find is folks do an okay job, but they virtually never hit the targets that we have out there, particularly if they're really hard charging athletes, police, firefighters working in a hot or humid environment. Like, they're always under powered in what they need to do from the electrolyte standpoint. And so that was part of the impetus of doing this, making it a pretty tasty beverage so that people would be kind of induced to drink more of it and get more of that electrolyte down the hatch. But it's worked remarkably well. And it's funny, I don't know that like Barry Sears had ever talked about the need for additional sodium. He had also done some pieces that said, oh, you don't need to worry about sodium so long as you're not eating a ton of refined carbohydrates and you're not, in this like insulin resistant kind of mode. But it's really so important, but it didn't get woven into like the religious doctrine of like doing the zone, and similar thing with like low carb and keto and all that stuff. Like if somebody is put on a medically supervised ketogenic diet, that dietitian is going to make certain that the person gets at least 5 grams of sodium a day. Like it's understood due to this phenomenon called the natriuresis of fasting. When somebody fasts or is on a very low carb diet, their insulin levels drop, which causes a hormone called aldosterone to decrease. And aldosterone is what causes us to retain sodium. When we retain sodium, we retain water, and we all want some degree of that. Like you don't want too much, you don't want too little. And so this is another thing that even in kind of low carb world, and I'm a pretty good biochemist. I understand the metabolic pathways and all that stuff, but it was never part of that like central dogma that like sodium was as important as protein in this whole story. And then I met Tyler Cartwright and Luis Villaseñor. They're the founders of Keto Gains, and they've worked in a clinical setting with just tens of thousands of people over the years, and they really understood the need for the sodium piece. And the results they were getting with people were just jaw-dropping. And they had some really high motor folks, some folks competing in and around the CrossFit games, some high-level jiu-jitsu people and stuff like that. And I was like, how the heck are they doing this? And as I started talking to them, they just were like, oh, the sodium piece is just super overlooked. And it even some of the smaller females that they work with may end up consuming 10 grams of sodium per day from all sources, olives and salami, and then also, supplemental sodium. And it just makes this shocking difference for people when they get that right.
Yeah, as you were saying that, one of the things I thought of is I'll take creatine, which has no flavor, oftentimes post-workout. Might be a good idea to throw that in with some element to give it some flavor, especially post-workout. You mentioned coach. Let me ask you this. I haven't spoken to you obviously since everything went down.
Right.
And I know you've had we're not in, that's not why we're on here to talk about that.
Right.
What's your overall opinion on what he did to the fitness community world? And I meant that in a positive way, not did in a negative way, but did his impact.
I mean, clearly it was a world-changing impact. I mean, I go into Cabela's and Walmart and Target, and you see influence of CrossFit in there. You see wall ball type stuff, and you see imagery of people wearing knee socks and nanos and shit like that, and then you can't go into a fitness facility and not see an imprint of that, and so I think it put this idea of something other than the bodybuilding kind of fitness it created a new box, an intellectual box that you could put that stuff in. And I think that that's incredibly valuable. It provides so much more opportunity for people to kind of express themselves via physical movement. I think that doing workouts that are kind of game formatted, it's like, do this much of this, and try to chug through it at as rapid a clip as you can. It's just a lot of fun, compared to like, okay, we're going to do like I got back into some kind of gymnastics-y powerlifting type stuff, which is cool, but I got to say it's boring, by comparison. It's like, okay, I have 8 more sets of this planche thing I'm going to work on, and then I have a 2-minute rest in between that I try to do a little bit of other peripheral work and some mobility and everything. But it's like, oh my God, this is boring. But some of these skill-based things, you can't just smoke yourself on it, at least until you get going. So I think it's really cool that they put all that stuff in it. I think the missed opportunities was that I don't think anybody was more surprised by the success of CrossFit than Greg. Like I don't think up until very late in the game that he really believed that it was ever going to be the thing that it was. And I think that caused that fed into a tendency of thinking about this thing very short term, and I kind of liken it to strip mining. I feel like the negative side is that fitness was strip mined and kind of like extracted and carried away. I think that there was a huge like that CrossFit health angle. That was something that I suggested in 2009. I'm like, why don't we bifurcate this thing and have like a fitness track and a health track? And this was not too long before I ended up getting booted out of there. But I was fairly prescient with a lot of things, and like there was an opportunity there. The thing that I had suggested is, why don't you get a doctor, an internal medicine doctor, a physical medicine doctor, like a DPT or a physical therapist, attached with each gym, each and every gym. And it doesn't mean that they're in the physical location, although that would be awesome, but at least close proximity. So when people want some blood work, they have somebody credible to go get blood work, and they understand that, lower carb diets, although not the right answer for everybody, are a great solution for metabolic disorder and whatnot. And imagine a network of gyms and practitioners that had a couple of million people cycling through that. And then you spin up an insurance product that is insuring people who are disproportionately healthy and disproportionately low risk. Like, that could have not only changed fitness, it could have changed medicine and healthcare. It literally could have changed healthcare. And since around 2013, 2012, it's been on my radar that the Congressional Budget Office has been projecting that diabetes would bankrupt the United States by like 2035. These are like really big, important things, and fitness is important too. But COVID aside, like we were already on a kind of a brick wall with regards to like financing the innards of our healthcare system. And it's only gotten worse. And that's kind of the heartbreaker for me, is I think that opportunity was missed. I give a hat tip to Eric Rosa. Like, he seems to really be attempting to spin that part up within CrossFit, but I don't know if the ship has sailed on that. Like, CrossFit's always going to be there. It's always going to be an entity, but, I don't know if there's going to be an opportunity to hit that high inflection point again. They really, I feel like they need something to rally around, and transforming healthcare, in my mind, is the thing that it's like, yes, we've got the games, we've got all this cool shit. People are jacked. The girls are hot. The dudes are gorgeous. Great. Check. Got it. Now let's fucking save healthcare and like really do kind of like a Rob Roy, like, a war cry around that stuff. And I don't know if there's quite the will, or, in my opinion, the awareness. I could be wrong about all that stuff, but again, I'll pat myself on the back a little bit. I've been able to look around some corners and look down the road 10, 15 years on a lot of this stuff, and have a sense of, hey, this might be a good idea to orient things this way. Yeah.
One of the things you said, I think, is absolutely true. You knew Greg a lot better than I did, especially in the early days, but it was very short-sighted. And I think that was part of the beauty of it, right? Like, it's us against them.
Right.
Where it really could have been us against them, and then slowly started to expand. And I think it did start to get there, but I think, we've said this before on the podcast, like, he's insane, right? But the insane part of him is like what allowed him to create that. All of anyone that's a true entrepreneur, I'd say the same about you. I'm sure people say it about me. Like, you have to have a touch of craziness to do that. It's just a matter of where that balance is.
Yes. Yeah. If you realized how hard and how unlikely success was doing something new, you just wouldn't do it. And yeah.
I have seen some old school names kind of making their way back into the CrossFit mix. Have you considered it?
I'm actually going to be doing a gig for CrossFit Health, doing some of their CME work. So I will be presenting a thing on the neuroregulation of appetite, and so that's going to be part of their
that's awesome.
Their CME offerings. So yeah. It's a huge honor to do that. It's a great program, and lots of wonderful people in there. So yeah, I'm really stoked to be able to help with that. Yeah.
I'm sure there was a filter coming into you, but were you surprised? Like, whoa, this is an unexpected email or phone call?
Not super duper, because it wasn't too long after, like, I knew Eric Rosa long before he purchased CrossFit. He had Chris Kresser and I go out to his gym man, a long time ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And we went out there twice to Sanitas and did some seminars for him. And so we had a little bit of a relationship prior to all that stuff. And it was maybe a couple of days, maybe a week or so after that transaction at least was underway, that he reached out to me and was, just kind of checking in and asked me some questions about like, hey, what do you think about all this stuff? Where do you see some of the, the challenges that CrossFit globally faces? And then like at the individual level, like owning a gym and stuff like that. And so we shared some ideas around that. So I wasn't super surprised. What has been surprising to me is folks that when all that stuff went down, like they could spare no effort in trying to curry some favor by like sticking some knives in me, just kind of doing some squirrely stuff. And then lo and behold, now like they're trying to get into, say, like a blood glucose testing company. And then, oh man, wow, Robb is on the board of advisors for this company. And so now they have to kind of like circle back around and, hey, so how are you doing? And I've had some very funny and very awkward, conversations with people where I think they assumed that party was going to go on forever, and it kind of seemed like it was going to, but everything changes, and yeah, it's just been interesting. I won't overly beat that, but it's been interesting, and some folks that definitely were not kind to me in the past have found themselves in some very awkward spots where it's like, oh, you actually need to chat with him because he's like on our scientific advisory board. Do you know Robb Wolf? And they're like, oh, fuck yeah, I really do know that guy. He definitely knows me, So yeah.
Well, it's been interesting because over the years, you've just grinded, and it's been impressive. I mean, from being on much bigger podcasts to ours, to all the books you put out to new companies, like you've just, I don't want to say silent because that's not the right word. It's not been silent at all. You've been very vocal and very out there. So it's awesome to see from my perspective. To me, you're still just an OG CrossFit dude, like doing it. And it's really great to see. One of the things that I want to ask you about is selfishly, but two different topics, but let's talk about the one I think you'll enjoy, BJJ. So you're big into Brazilian jiu-jitsu right now. And that was actually, these two topics overlap. I started doing carnivore.
Okay.
So Dr. Paul Saladino, I'm sure you've heard of him. We've had him on the podcast, and hearing him and Mark Bell and a few others really promoted, Joe Rogan. I was like, I remember having breakfast one morning with my wife. One day I'll try this thing. And she's like, you're eating bacon and eggs. Start today. And I was like, all right, no excuses. Yeah. So I started doing it. And that's actually when I started cramping more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started doing the Himalaya, but a lot of the cramping was happening at jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So I certainly want to dive into jiu-jitsu, but my specific question is, do you think the cramping is happening because, like you mentioned, just the sweating and losing the salt, or, for example, we're always flexing our calves? Is it the repeated muscle flexion, or is it a combination of both?
It's a little combination of both, but it really is a sign of low electrolyte status, in particular sodium. And even for non-super sweater folks, the main electrolyte that we lose while sweating is sodium. Like it's like 100-to-1 relative to, say, potassium or magnesium, which folks get kind of geeked out about. Consuming more potassium and magnesium, but it doesn't really address the cause of the cramp. And something that folks don't appreciate when occasionally a lethal injection is given to somebody who's on like death row, it's a giant bolus of potassium. It causes the heart to cramp, and that's it. And so sodium, these electrolytes have this interplay of causing things to contract and to relax, and you need balance for both of those. And jiu-jitsu, even if you're in no gi stuff and air conditioning, like you just sweat a lot. If you're wearing the gi also, and you're in any type of like kind of a warm environment, it's almost like doing a sauna. Like I'd be interested to know what people's like internal body temperature get is like 102 occasionally, 103 while you're,
I hate the gi. I
you know,
prefer no
it's,
gi. I
yeah,
prefer no
yeah.
gi. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, squirrely strong guys like that, like fat, old, weak guys like me definitely like the gi because people can't squirrel around as much. But
Hold me
I
down.
really think it's a lack of adequate sodium in particular. And I think just going, full carnivore, again, the insulin levels are going to be quite low. So one's tendency to retain sodium is again going to be very, very low. And I think that there's kind of a reality we can get all kind of romancified around like paleo man and functional exercise and all that stuff. And our ancestors were definitely active, and even when we look at contemporary hunter gatherers, they're definitely active, but they're not CrossFitters. They're not semi-pro athletes doing jiu-jitsu. Like there was maybe one really hard session a week, and then the rest of the time was like rather relaxed and very low intensity and whatnot. And I think when you start overlapping those things, that's where like, well, maybe you need a little bit more carbs, and or maybe you need to supplement the sodium. And this is where the divergence from kind of like this idealized paleo landscape occurs relative. Well, we're living this modern world, and I want to do jujitsu 3 to 5 days per week, and I just need to fuel myself in a way that facilitates that. Regardless of what my thoughts around like, well, because I know within the carnivore circles, there are a lot of folks who are like, you do not need additional sodium. And I'm like, okay, cool. Go do 2 hours of rolling with me and get back to me about that, and let's do an experiment and do one day with no electrolytes and another day with electrolytes and just see how you do with that, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the calf, when that cramps, it's just pain.
It feels like your shin is going to break. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you've got, yeah, it's bad. It's bad news. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, when I was really, I'm still, I would say meat based, but incorporated some fruits and vegetables back in. But there was a few nights I woke up and my adductor was cramped. And you're like in the middle of the night, you're like, I don't even know how to stretch this thing to try to loosen it back up. And it's just the worst pain. But I know you are a heavy jiu-jitsu practitioner. What caused you to get back into it? I think much like me, there's a lot of ebbs and flow in your jiu-jitsu career. Like when you're an entrepreneur, life just gets in the way. And as much as I love jiu-jitsu, I put it right at the top of my favorites. It was often the first thing to go.
Yeah.
Because it's not the difference between jiu-jitsu and CrossFit is it's not an hour.
Right.
For those that don't practice, it's you have to get there. Usually it's like an hour of drilling, 30 minutes of rolling, get home. You're probably going to want to shower because you've been sweating with other dudes. Like it's an endeavor every day. So what allowed you to get back into it, and what was the catalyst for that?
Oh man, so the first time I ever saw Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was in 93 or 94 down in Los Angeles. And I was in this Thai boxing instructor training program. And so I was really interested in that. And then I had heard a little bit about this like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And then I got to do some rolling with this guy. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is crazy. It was so efficient and gentle. It was really crazy. But there was nobody out there at that point. And I ended up moving from Southern California back up to Chico, California. And there was nobody there that, there wasn't even a blue belt. There was kind of a Nobuki-kan that had some Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I knew that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I would dabble a little bit here, dabble a little bit there, but it was a similar deal. Like there was so little jiu-jitsu that the little bit that existed, they were usually in the back of karate studio. Their classes didn't start until 9 o'clock at night. And for whatever reason, like my work schedule has always been that I've been on the early schedule. Like I'm up at 5:30 or 6 at the latest generally, and out to get to the lab or get to the gym or wherever it was that I was working. And I would do those late sessions, not sleep, get up the next day, totally just crushed. And I'm like, I can't do this. And it was 2012 that my wife and I moved to Reno. She was pregnant with our first daughter. And I finally started tracking down some schools that were legitimately schools. They had a noon hour. They had some morning classes. They were functioning the way that classic Taekwondo schools had functioned. They actually had a little bit of business structure and everything. And that was really the turning point. I just needed somewhere that I could train that fit into my schedule, because I get up early, I get a big bolus of work done. Breaking out for that like hour and a half or 2 hour period then doesn't hurt as bad, because it's like, okay, I got a lot of work done. I'll do this. I'll eat some food. Then I can get my second shift, later in the afternoon. And that was really the turning point for me. And so it was around 2012 that I started getting some degree of consistency with my training. And now I'm a brown belt. I'll probably be a brown belt for 2 or 3 years, before I take the step up. Hopefully it's that long, because I still feel like an imposter with the brown belt, but it's been cool. It's been really cool. And the community is awesome. Learning something new all the time is awesome. It feels more like something that I could do pretty much the rest of my life, so long as I pick smart training partners and know when to tap and all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had my purple belt for about 8 years. So
okay.
It's been a while. But there's that famous quote: "A belt only covers an inch of your ass. You have to cover the rest." So
right.
I'm not too concerned about it. You say all that, and I believe I read. I don't know if you're still eating this way, but you were in intermittent faster, much like myself, but almost a reverse intermittent faster. Most people think intermittent fasting, they think sleep through the night, push that window out, start eating later in the afternoon. But you're the opposite. Is that still true?
Yeah, I do seem to feel better with front loading more of my calories. And because we have 2 kids now, they're 7 and 9. If I had my ideal world, I would eat a huge breakfast, and then I would do jiu-jitsu or work out somewhere around noon. And then based off of how much activity I did there, then my next meal would fill that gap. If it was a lot of activity, I'd have a really huge, kind of like early dinner at like 3 o'clock, and then I would be done. That would be my ideal world.
You got to move to Florida.
Yeah.
Get the early bird. Yeah.
Yeah. The blue hair hour, go out and all that. But we have kids, and the dinner time is an important time to like connect with them and just chat and hang out. And so what I do is still mainly that, but my breakfast is big regardless of the day. Just tend to feel pretty good starting that off.
What's that look like? What's your big breakfast?
It might be like 50 grams of protein from chicken, fish, beef, something like that.
But not a standard breakfast. You're just eating it in the morning.
Yeah.
Could be standard, but you're not saying like eggs, bacon, sausage. You're saying,
well, unfortunately, I developed an egg intolerance over time, and so I have to really be super selective with eggs. But I'll do a hunk of protein, maybe a little bit of fruit, some nuts, like half cup of nuts, or usually macadamias, and that's kind of breakfast. Pretty sizable breakfast. I definitely focus on kind of the low FODMAP, because I will definitely get gassy, and like having somebody give you horrible side control pressure or something, and you're just like farting all over the mat is terrible for everybody involved. And so I just noticed that I don't have that bloat and everything. And so that's better. And then I'll eat when we get home. And usually it's a pretty good, like if we had a barn burner of the day, it's a pretty good sized meal. And then the dinner is just kind of a token thing. It's like a little bit of protein and a little bit of like greens, or, a little bit of fruit, some berries with some whipped cream or something like that. Like it's really kind of a token deal, because again, I feel like I just sleep a little bit better. My body winds down a little bit better by having fewer of the calories late in the day versus early in the day. And I followed a guy, Bill Lagakos, for a long time, and he's really geeked out on this kind of circadian rhythm, circadian biology thing. And I don't think that the early versus late is a complete deal breaker one way or the other. I think that focus on your protein, make sure that you're not over consuming food. And that's kind of where the most important stuff happens. I think that the rest of this is very tertiary, but I do notice that my sleep is a little bit better. Back when I wore some HRV platforms, I would notice my HRV score was improved when I did more of this earlier food, very light, in the evening. I don't go so light that I'm hungry in the middle of the night. So I kind of pay attention to that. But yeah. So I do some time restricted eating, but I definitely do tend to front load the calories instead of back load the calories. Yeah.
And that's interesting. It's interesting you said that about HRV, because that was something I was experimenting with my Whoop. Is, man, my HRV was just low, and I'm a faster, and I tend to go like 22 hours a day. We have a 7-month-old, and typically right around the time I want to start eating, she's having a meltdown, and I can't get to so it just pushes back another hour or two. And then my HRV was really low those nights. And I realized, okay, if I stopped eating 2-3 hours before bed, my HRV would skyrocket. So I think that's a big deal as far as people trying to improve their HRV. Let me ask you a funny question. Can you explain HRV to a 5-year-old?
HRV, so it looks at the way our heart beats, and our heart shouldn't be a metronome. It shouldn't sound like a clock ticking. It should speed up naturally. It should slow down naturally. It should be really variable. And tracking that over time gives you some insight into how much stress you have. We would call it allostatic load, which is not 5-year-old typically appropriate. But and this is where, I wrote my first article on intermittent fasting, kind of went out to the CrossFit community in 2005. And by 2006, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Because I released it into a bunch of type A, like idiots, who were like, oh, 16 hours is great. And 22 or 23 hours must be even better. Oh, and I'll eat 5 grams of carbs a month. And it's just super overreaching, overtraining. And so it's really looking at the total stress load that an individual takes in. And that's something that historically we've been like, well, if you're a student athlete, you can go work out hard because all you're doing is sitting on your ass studying. But it's like, oh, well, cramming for that calculus exam is actually super exhausting. You can't just like separate that stuff out. And, you're not going to recover the same way from physical activity if you're really mentally challenged at the same time. And that's just kind of more like a possibly enjoyable stress, or at least a stress that we've chosen, to say nothing of, a sick kid at night or a police officer that has shift work and stuff like that. So the HRV just is a imperfect but very good measure of the total stress load an individual has. And it gives you an objective feedback, are you green, yellow, or red typically is what it will tell you. And you have to divine the tea leaves a little bit. It doesn't always give you the straight dope. You have to read between the lines a little bit. But where oftentimes people will be like, I feel like garbage today, but I'll go in and just kind of motor through. And sometimes it works out, but oftentimes that's the thing that, that's what got me sick. Like I was teetering on the brink of having a sore throat and getting a cold, and that thing pushed you over. And paying attention to the HRV can really help folks to navigate around that.
That was good, because we get asked that all the time, and I don't have an easy way to define it. So hopefully we can just direct people to that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of super complex math looking at the chaos mathematics of heartbeats. So it's heady stuff. So it's not the easiest thing to just like unpack it and give somebody. But the real essence is the way our heartbeat varies over time is very indicative of our total stress level. And HRV is a good way of getting our arms around that. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't understand. You want that bigger number to have a wider gap between heart. I mean, it's not substantial, that gap between heartbeats. It's indetectable to us, but whatever device you're wearing is detecting it. Do you think CrossFitters in general get so wrapped up in the minors, things like the Whoop, things like, like you said, fasting for 16 hours is good, so 20 hours should be better, rather than focusing on the basics?
I think it's easy for everybody to do that, not just CrossFitters. And like sleep is this thing that folks will jettison sleep to get in the workout. And this is a tough one, like somebody who works a demanding schedule and then they get home. Do they train in the evening? Well, if I train in the evening, then I don't sleep. Okay, they don't train in the evening, but now they're waking up at 4:30 a.m. to train in the morning. And so then it's like, well, I'm not going to fucking train at all if I don't do this, so you really end up pinched on that. But, the basics of like figuring out adequate protein level. Do you run better on carbs or fat or a combo? Like, I think that's a big deal. Do you have any problems with immunogenic foods? Gluten, dairy, a little bit of experimentation will figure that out. That's nutrition. Like, that's literally like everything out of nutrition that we need to be concerned with. And then we really need to think about like, well, what are we doing to foster sleep? And if I had my whole career to do over again, I would be the sleep guy, not the food guy, because I can get somebody to change their diet based off of how shitty their sleep is, and it's less of a fight. It's like, dude, it's your body that's waking up in the middle of the night with hypoglycemia. It's not mine. And the way that we fix that is reducing carbohydrate intake. So now we're not in this battle of like keto versus paleo versus vegan or whatever. It's like, well, we can tinker with all that stuff, but the thing that's going to make you sleep best is really the big deal. So I see folks devote enormous amounts of time to tracking and doing all kinds of different things, but then they will consistently ignore this like greatest return on investment they'll ever going to have, which is focusing on their sleep quality and sleep duration. So that's a long-winded answer to that. Yeah, if there was somewhere that I think that folks should generally focus much more attention on, it's sleep quality and sleep duration, and really optimizing that for their experience. And that will provide so much more feedback and return on investment than anything else. And to the degree things like Whoops and Oura rings and whatnot are valuable, it's, in my opinion, largely based on, is it informing your decisions around improving sleep in a positive way? And then I see the efficacy or the benefit really drop off immediately after that. I'm kind of like, I'm not too sure how much more valuable stuff is beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah. When people ask me about the Whoop, I tell them it's basically a sleep accountability buddy.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, when you eat late, your HRV goes down, or if you have a NorCal margarita, it might go down a little bit. Get to bed, try to get 8 hours. I've been listening to a lot of Andrew Huberman. I'm sure
he's amazing.
Yeah. He talks a lot about that. And I've tried to optimize like our sleep. We don't have a TV in the bedroom. I do my best not to bring the iPad in there to watch anything and stick to reading. Two things I've added are an 8 sleep, which is basically a cooler, and a gravity blanket, which is heavy.
Yeah.
And it's made a huge improvement, as well as like the important things like minimizing caffeine later in the day and watching how late I eat my food. What are some of the things you've done to optimize sleep? Exactly
the same. I ended up using a chili pad and then the same blanket you had mentioned. Yeah, just that cool surface. And I had been pretty geeked out on the rest of it. It's like blue blockers after sundown, and I'll do a little bit of melatonin, like 200 micrograms of melatonin before bed, a little bit of GABA. Try to get as much outside light during the day as I can, like that early morning light and the late evening light is really important for setting up circadian biology. So I was pretty good on all that stuff, but that additional thing of having like a chilled sleeping surface and then that super heavy, I don't know what it is. It's like going back to the womb or like something. I don't know what it is, because
you actually have 2 kids. You know this. You must have swaddled back in the day, because we were all about that swaddle for 3 months.
One of our kids loved it, and the second kid hated it. I mean, it made her nuts. And I tried on a pair of gloves the other day, and they were way too small. And I have this weird claustrophobia thing. Like, I didn't know if I was going to have to cut the glove off my hand in the store. Like, I was freaking out. So I have this weird kind of like claustrophobia thing, but yet with this heavy blanket doesn't induce that in me, which I thought it would. I had a little anxiety going into putting this like really heavy weighted blanket on me. I'm like, Nikki, if I freak out, like just get this thing off me, but it laid down on me. I'm like, oh God, this is amazing. It was like rubbing a crocodile's belly or something, So those are 2 biggies. I was doing like the blue blockers. I do a little bit of, sleep supplement support. I try to be diligent about being outside during the day and getting sun on my body and light in my eyes and all that stuff. But the change that a chilled like 8 Sleep and then Chili Pad have been kind of the biggies that I've seen. And then that weighted blanket is just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other companies. I use Gravity. We have no
Okay. Yeah.
tie to them, but I also did their weighted eye mask, which is
Oh.
great.
Huh.
Yeah, my wife Roz hates it. I wouldn't say she hates it. She just doesn't love it. So I wind up, it's a 35-pound blanket, but I wind up with 70 usually because it's like her half folds on top of mine.
Right.
It's heavy. Like, I didn't realize how heavy that would feel. I'm usually a guy that would lift his feet to tuck the blankets underneath, and you can do it, but it's like a leg extension in the middle of the night, and I'm like, but I also was the guy where I would wake up and my blankets were everywhere. I literally just slide myself out of bed and it's already, reading the book, Make Your Bed, I'm a big proponent of that. And I'm like, I don't have to anymore. So
right.
It's when I tell people about the 8 Sleep, again, I don't know if you have a relationship with them, but for me, I've just bought one. It was about $1,800. And it's funny, people like balk at that. I'm like, you got every piece of apparatus you can need and don't need for CrossFit. Your wrist wraps, your knee sleeves, your belts. You're buying all this supplements you don't need. Save it for a few months, and this is the most important supplement that you need.
Because if you sleep better, like,
it's a performance enhancer. Like you're on PEDs if you do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm almost 50, and I mean, I still motor along pretty well, and I think a big part of that is I'm very lucky. I get very good sleep. Like I've been able to construct a lifestyle that affords that, and I kind of really defended it almost at gunpoint. But when I don't have good sleep, I feel so terrible. My joints ache. I don't recover. That potential to catch a cold or something like that is so much greater, and it sounds so passive, and it's like, oh, I'm sleeping and it's enjoyable, but so it can't be as good, like junk food is enjoyable. So that can't be good either, but it's like, no, man, the sleep is really where it's at. And I really agree with your thing there. It's like, you don't need the other pair of shoes. You don't need the other pair of pants. Like, save your money and get one of the, invest $2,000 in like your sleep gym,
It's a one-time expense too. You don't need it over and over.
Yeah.
Because of the pandemic, I've not been traveling as much for CrossFit seminars, and recently I just did 2 seminars in a prison, and my recovery is generally really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a 4% on.
Oh wow!
And I think it was just my body was like, "Where are we? You don't have any of this." To a fault, I'm spoiled there. So I think it really makes a difference, because even on nights where the baby wakes up or I don't sleep as long as I'd like, my recovery stays high because the quality of that sleep is better. Yeah. So I've often said there's sleep, stress, fitness, and nutrition as far as 4 pillars. And I've not created that. You and other smart people have said similar things. And oftentimes sleep is the first to go.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe nutrition is, and I remind people, fitness should be the first thing to go if we're looking at long-term health. Do you agree with that?
I would generally agree with that, or fitness can go on such a low maintenance dose, like once or twice per week of some 3 sets of a 90% effort on squat, deadlift, bench, you'll maintain. Or if you decline, you'll decline super slowly over time. You lose like 2% a month or something like that. Like, you can really maintain that. Aerobic capacity declines a little faster, but that's where, one modest session, of lower intensity, and like one interval-based session can maintain 85% of your baseline like aerobic capacity. So we're talking about like literally minutes a week to maintain what people have had. And so then you don't fully give it all up, but it's maintenance is so easy compared to getting better at something. Like, if you've got a 400-pound deadlift and you want to maintain within 10% of that maintenance is easy. If you want to get to a 420-pound deadlift, the amount of work to do that can be just absolutely monumental. And I think that people work so hard to get somewhere that they they don't realize how easy it is to relax and then just, okay, I'm going to take a 10% hit. But then when my life gets itself squared away, I'm only 10% off of my best. And it was taking no time out of my day-to-day life, or, virtually none. They really underappreciate how easy it is to maintain. The ego gets wrapped up and they're like, well, if I'm going to lose anything, I'm just going to lose all of it, and yeah.
And I try to remind people, like, you mentioned a 400-pound deadlift. If you have a 360-pound deadlift, that's more than you will hopefully. I always tell people it's more than you will need. And if you need more, you're going to have whatever craziness running through you in that moment. It doesn't matter if it's 360 or 100, you're going to lift that car off the baby or whatever it is,
Right.
So
right. You get a goddamn neighbor to help you, it's like, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Rob, it's been fantastic talking to you, other than robbwolf.com, which is still impressive that you own that domain. And drink, and for the record, it's LMNT.
NT, but we pronounce it element. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So drink lmnt.com. And like I said, I highly recommend, but is there any other place we can send people to check you out?
That's most everywhere that I hang out. Yeah.
So, and you sent me those packages. Are those available in any sort of different ways, or are they the party pack, or I forget what you called that one pack?
Oh, that value bundle. There's the Fiesta pack. There's a bunch of different ways to get them. Yeah. And I don't know if we still have it going on, but there was a free plus shipping sampler where it was like $5 and they'll send you all 8 of the flavors, and then you can check it out. And we have a 100% money back guarantee. Like, if people don't like it, we'll send their money back. But yeah, generally folks, if they try it, they tend to really enjoy it.
And you can order any flavor in 30. I love the fact that they're individual packs, because like I said, I was just away and it's so much easier. I wish everything came like that. Like, I grabbed 5 of them. I knew I'd be gone for 5 days, threw them in my bag, first thing in the morning, threw them down. So I love the fact. Are you going to ever expand into a jar
the scooper deal? We looked at it, and you have to add or do kind of crazy things, otherwise it turns into a brick in like a week. So it's very hygroscopic. It pulls water into it, and God bless the folks that follow us, but they're very geeked out on like paleo and clean eating and all this stuff, and everything that you would do to prevent it from turning into a brick they don't like. So I'm kind of like, I don't know if we might do it, but I'm not totally sure. And even on the recycling and like the environmental footprint and everything, we've been doing some life cycle analysis on this stuff. And as crazy as it sounds, these stick packs are actually less footprint than a can, unless you get into this complex deal where you send people a really nice can, and then you have this kind of minimalist packing that you send the stuff as a refill in. And then the problem with that is that if it's hygroscopic, it starts turning into a brick. So we've looked into it a lot, and it's funny because it's just salt, but it's a non-trivial like kind of engineering problem to figure out how you don't deliver somebody a brick of salt, which then they is unusable basically unless they're like breaking it into pieces. Yeah,
that makes sense. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but yeah, you mentioned I use a company called Seed for my probiotic. Yep. Yeah, so they do that. I have like their green jar, and then every 30 days they send me, but that's a pill, so it's a little bit different as well than what you're suggesting. But I like it. I search for simplicity in my life these days, and digging into find the scooper, and then when it gets low and you get the salt or protein powder all over your hand, like I love it. Keep it this way, and for those it's like, if you subscribe to it, it's like $1.10 per stick, if you will. And most of the people listening are spending 5 times that on their caffeine habit. So do this. If you've ever cramped in the middle of a workout, this is the way to go. Because it's, by the way, I didn't get to that point, but this stopped the cramping.
Yes.
Once in a while, I'll still get a calf cramp at jiu-jitsu. It's probably, like you said, it's more indicative to how much water I've drank, how long I've been training. And it does happen more so in the gi that you mentioned, which you're hotter. you're also
hotter and you're sweating more.
Probably tend to hold those positions a little longer, so your muscles are flexed a bit longer. So more excuses to avoid the gi in the future.
Exactly.
Really. Maybe that's why I'm still a purple belt after 8 years. Who knows? But and then of course all your books are amazing. We have literally all of them on Audible. My wife's a big nutrition geek. She just finished her course, but she's always it's one of the it's funny. I turn on the car sometimes, and if she were in it last, your voice will pop up, or like
funny.
It's and I'm like, what is she listening to now? Wired to Eat will pop up and all that. So
awesome.
It's really cool. Like I said, just been awesome to see you being a constant. I'm really excited to hear that you're kind of coming somewhat back into the mix, and I hope that gets even bigger, because like you said, it's not too late for us to have that impact you were talking about earlier. And I think since you're coming back, I think you can really help drive that forward, which is pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Like I saw early on CrossFit changing the world. I told Greg almost 10 years ahead of when I projected he would have 10,000 affiliates. And it actually took a little longer than what I guessed. But I was pretty spot on with that. But it's in my opinion, CrossFit is possibly the one thing that, if properly rolled out, could really change like our food systems, our healthcare systems, because this decentralization of these gyms is so powerful. It's a multi-headed hydra, and then if you add some kind of leveraging of things like local food distribution, and you spun up an insurance product so that people were stepping outside of the standard third-party payer system and stuff like that, and they're really being rewarded for taking good care of themselves, it could change everything, and even if it didn't change everything, it would change change the lives of the people involved with it. And it would, fitness is big, but fitness is a rounding error in the bank ledger of medicine. And if all you want to do is make money, then fucking go in and change medicine using a fitness modality, and I really think that's the opportunity there. So do it because we all have children and we want a better world, or do it because you just want to make a retarded amount of money and go forward in the world, So yeah, either way, it's a win.
Yeah, I love it. Well, once again, we appreciate you coming on, Rob. Thank you for everything you've done and continue to do. It's been a great time catching up with you.
It's great reconnecting with you. There was a time where we would see each other like 3 or 4 or 5 times a year, and then it's just poof, So yeah, it's great seeing you.
Yeah, I mean, I went to email you after seeing you on Brian's podcast. I was like, I should reach out to Rob. And for reference, I had Rob at NorCalCrossFit.com. So that's an indication.
That was a long time ago.
Into how long it's been. Yeah. I was like, okay, let me, hey, Brian, can you shoot him an email? I don't think this is up to date. Yeah. So
very cool.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Take care.
So you never miss an episode of the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel and on all major podcasting platforms at Best Hour of Their Day. Thank you so much for tuning in and for being a part of the best hour of our day. See you next time.